I picked one of my favorite poems, and a kind of challenging poem, uh, partly because this is a 17th century poem, and a lot of the references are really kind of old references, and we a little bit we have to put ourselves back in time, um, to uh, to really to really get what's going on in the poem. And some of the language is a little challenging for us too, and we can talk about that. Um, but why don't I read the poem, and then we can start our conversation, if that's okay with you. So this is John Donne's A Valediction forbidding mourning. As virtuous men pass mildly away and whisper to their souls to go, whilst some of their sad friends do say, the breath goes now, and some say, no. So let us melt and make no noise, no tear floods nor sigh tempests move. 'Twere profanation of our joys to tell the laity our love. Moving of the earth brings harms and fears. Men reckon what it did and meant. But trepidation of the spheres, though greater far, is innocent. Dull sublunary lovers love, whose soul is sense, cannot admit absence, because it doth remove those things which elemented it. But we, by a love so much refined that ourselves know not what it is, interassured of the mind, care less eyes, lips, and hands to miss. Our two souls, therefore, which are one, though I must go, endure not yet a breach, but an expansion, like gold to airy thinness beat. If they be two, they are two so as stiff twin compasses are two. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show to move, but doth if the other do. And though it in the center sit, yet when the other far doth roam, it leans and hearkens after it, and grows erect as it comes home. Such wilt thou be to me, who must like the other foot obliquely run. Thy firmness makes my circle just, and makes me end where I begun. Um, I think it's a love poem. So I think unmute yourself so we can hear you. Um, um, what do you like about this poem, or what remains a challenge for you?
I like, so let us melt and make no noise.
What do you like about that?
That seems a funny way to react in the face of death.
Yeah, but I think, let me say, certainly there's death in the title, and there's death in the opening stanza. But I would say one of the key words in the poem is the very first word, as. And that, what is that as doing in the poem? It's setting up, it's setting up the whole poem, really.
By
What?
declaring a simile.
Yeah, yeah. That in a way, this situation is not death, although it may be like a certain kind of death. What Donne describes as some sort of some admirable thing, and he sets up what is that whole first stanza depicting?
Well, I thought it was like a deathbed scene, as if people are
Right,
observing whether or not the moment of death has actually happened.
right. It's a death that's so calm, that's so quiet, that the friends and family surrounding the dying person really can't tell whether the person has actually died or not. Can't tell the moment of death because it's so quiet. And 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 in what way does that simile set up the whole rest of the poem? Because it's not really a poem about death, although fear of death may be part of it, but fear of death in what context?
Seems like a poem about parting or separation. And
Right,
this is
right,
that first scene is the soul leaving the body.
right.
But then there's a simile about the two people, soulmates, parting.
Yes, and we know a little bit about this, and uh, Donne was both a cleric and a kind of political figure, and someone a contemporary wrote explaining that Donne had to make a trip to the continent, and he was leaving his wife, and essentially telling her not to worry, that their parting should be, was not fearful, that, he'd be all right and he'd be back. And for her not to worry, and that they shouldn't make a scene, and that they should make their separation in this very quiet way, the way a good person's soul quietly de- departs from the body. In a way, the poem is almost the opposite of Dylan Thomas's "Do not go gentle into that good night." And this is a poem about that begins with an image of someone going so gently into whose soul is so gently separating from the body that you almost can't tell whether they're still living or not. And this is the comfort that that Donne is trying to convey to his wife.
Lloyd, it's a good poem for Zoom meetings
Yes.
because it says, I mean, although it recognizes we would like to be together in person, if we are together in spirit, are we not together?
Yeah. Well, I have to say that was one of the reasons that I thought about doing this poem, because we're not doing a lot of traveling. We're not separating from our loved ones very much. And Ted, what were you going to? You had your hand up.
I really just put my thumb in the air to agree with Jennifer's comment.
Oh,
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Lloyd, I have a question. Is
Yes.
this the birth of British stiff upper lip?
Oh,
No, that comes later when we get to the word erect. But
we'll come back to that.
I told you, Lloyd, that when I got to the third stanza, I actually read it very differently, because I read it as moving the earth as in digging a grave.
Yeah, well,
that was an image that I had a hard time shaking.
Me too.
Yeah. I think I mean, yeah, let's get to that, but I think let me let's wait a minute before we get to that, but let me say one of the things that's so interesting and kind of special and powerful about this poem, and it's one of the reasons that John Donne and a number of his contemporaries, George Herbert and Crashaw, and a number of the 17th century poets were given the nickname the metaphysical poets. There's a famous essay by T.S. Eliot on the metaphysical poets and why they're wonderful poets. And the nickname was given a century later, mainly by Samuel Johnson in the 18th century. And metaphysical was an insult that these poets seemed to be, that their imagery seemed weirdly scientific, and that seemed really inappropriate for poetry, let alone love poetry. And one of the fascinating things about these poems is where the images came from and how unusual, or at least to us, how unusual the imagery was for a love poem, but that in fact it's not so weird if you kind of understand how do we put this, the view of the universe in the early part of the 17th century, where the whole, science was changing. and and the big conflict and the big new difference was looking at the universe as geocentric, with the earth in the middle of everything, and all of these spheres, 9 is the usual number, surrounding the earth, so that the moon went around the earth, the sun went around the earth, the planets all moved around the earth. So the difference between a geocentric, the earth-centered universe, solar system, and the heliocentric, the new idea of the sun actually being the center of our solar system, this was all playing out. And in Donne's poem, Donne is still leaning on this older idea of the earth being essentially being the center of the universe, and that he wasn't being radically scientific. I mean, he was using interesting images, but he was using a kind of language, even sometimes a scientific language, but he was using a language that would be very familiar to his readers. And also interesting to know that Donne's poems, I mean, there's so many famous poems, were actually not published until after his death. So that, you know, he was one of those writers, they in English courses, they tell you that these poems circulated in manuscript among his friends. And they weren't really gathered and collected until after he died in the late 1630s. So,
oh, go ahead.
Dory, please.
That makes me remember that, of course, John Donne was also a clergyman.
Yes.
And this poem contrasts the profane and the sacred implicitly. And I would think that his religious background would make him tend to contrast earthly things to non-earthly things, which would be sort of a correlative to what we're talking about in terms of science. But I think that there's a strong religious influence here.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think both.
Yeah.
And what's so, one of the things that's really fascinating about the poem is the way it combines the spiritual and the scientific.
Yes, what you were saying about the thinking in the 17th century reminded me that when I first read this poem, I was 19 years old, and I was in a class studying the metaphysical poets. And I was a much less sophisticated reader than I am today. And it was a challenge for me to parse my way through this, but I never forgot it. And it made a tremendous impression on me, partly because of the way it used what we're calling science. Because by the time of the 20th century, that was in the culture in a different way. And so it felt really different to me from what I had read in
right.
Romantics and that and the other thing. So it really, it struck me as particularly modern at that time. That's all.
Yeah, but and I would just say that for a contemporary reader of John Donne's, the idea that the earth was the center of the universe or the center of the solar system even, was just as common and taken for granted as for us the idea that the Earth, rotates around the sun. That this is what they grew up with. This is what was.
Well,
This was what
I'm
was
not so sure.
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Copernicus had died in 1543,
right.
and Tycho Brahe died the year Donne was married, and they had really undone this notion of a sublunary sphere that was full of movement and corruption and so on, and heavens that were incorruptible, unchangeable, mechanical.
Right.
So in that stanza, you could read, but trepidation of the spheres, that is, the trembling of the spheres, is harmless. That is I don't know if that's the way to read it, but that's how I read it.
No, that's true. But I think what I am, I think all of that profound shift in astronomy and science, it was happening. It had happened, but it hadn't really kind of sunk down into the general apprehension of the universe. And I think Donne is kind of, he must have been aware. He was really smart and
educated.
So he must have been aware of this, but I'm not sure it had actually sunk in yet. And the poem really, to me, seems to rely on a more ancient sense of what the order of the universe was considered.
Okay, I was reading it as ironic about that.
Yeah, I'm. Well, let's look at those. Because I'm not sure about that. But let's. So, and I think in the second stanza we get to one example of the point that Dory was making about the spiritual. I mean, there is certainly irony in the poem, and one of the places it's most apparent, it seems to me, is in that second stanza. So let us melt and make no noise. No tear floods nor sigh tempests move. And to me, that seems like a kind of mockery of, or satirizing, romance novels didn't exactly exist yet, but poems about love where the lover is saying, oh, I'm going to miss you so much that my tears will be a flood. My sighs will be a tempest. And Donne is sort of mocking that, and he's saying, no, we're too good for that. We're too smart. We love each other too much to make this huge display for profanation. And there is the word. This is it would be compromising. It would be profaning the spiritual nature of our joys, which seems to me already a kind of sexual reference, that their sexuality, their love, is really a kind of a spiritual love. It's certainly physical, but it's physical and spiritual. I mean, does that make sense?
It's also wonderful that he's writing the poem. So it sort of works. There's the tension between those two.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And I think it's very deliberate and very, very conscious. But Pat, I think you're, I think that. Was that you?
It was me, Em.
Oh, M. Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, but I think that's right. I think that there is that tension in this poem, and that one of the pleasures of this poem is that it is a love poem, but that the images in the poem are not the images that you find in the typical love poem. "'Twere profanation of our joys to tell the laity our love." So
That made me wonder if it was a homosexual love.
why? I don't think so.
Well, just why would marital love be profane? Just because about sex?
But just the opposite. Just the opposite, that to make a big scene would make their spiritual bond more profane, and that the laity is it's as if, we know Donne was married. I guess that doesn't prove anything. But,
well, they also had 12 children.
Right, which may be,
or 12 pregnancies, but
yes, right, maybe a little more evidence to that.
So I was really making too much of the stiff twin compasses.
I think so.
We have to make a lot of those. But to tell the laity our love is that he's really condescending to all these ordinary people who make, who protest too much when they have to separate. All these ordinary lovers who have to make a scene when they separate. And this valediction, he's saying goodbye to her, but he's saying, don't be upset. Don't mourn. This isn't so bad. It's not so dangerous, and I'll be back. Don't worry.
Lloyd?
Yes.
Yeah, this also seems an example of a sort of extreme British class system, where he is an elitist upper class and is totally dismissing the laity or the bottom layer of society.
So but I think it's also, about whether this is something public or something private. The Tempest and all of this is a public outpouring that he sees as kind of crude, right? And not tell the laity is, this is just for you and me. And there's the irony, of course, because he's writing a poem that's not just for the two of them, but it is this private moment, I think, that he's trying to celebrate at this point. It's not for other people. Maybe there is a class issue in that as well, but I see this as, as I said, this moment between them.
Yeah, I honestly don't think it's a class issue, except as a kind of joke that these lovers, he's saying, our love is so special, it really lifts us above all the ordinary lovers who feel they have to make a scene if there's some separation.
It's
Gail?
sublime. It's just sublime.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Sacred.
and sacred. Yeah, that it's that it that the nature of this love poem is that he's saying our love is really special, and we are, that we are um we are almost the spiritual embodiment of what love is supposed to be, along with the physical.
Lloyd,
Yes.
could I know there's so much to get to in the poem, but it seems to me some of this is there in the first stanza, in the first half of the simile, even in that no. I read it as saying it's exactly as what you described. It's like those deaths that are so peaceful that the friends can hardly tell which. He's stopped breathing. No, he hasn't stopped breathing. But I also hear, someone to protest, don't go, don't die, don't be dead at the moment in that no. And that there's a sort of, you don't, if it's a virtuous death, if they're going peacefully, you can let them go and you don't have to say no, and it doesn't have to be a moment of trauma. So I feel, not that the poems spend so much time in that sphere, but I feel emotionally that's set up too, that there's a way for virtuous death that says death doesn't have to be a horror. And you can let people go and you don't have to protest and say no. Why? Because you knew them, you were their friend, they're gone, but you're still connected. There's a sort of prefiguring of the kind of quality of the relationship in the other. We don't have to protest a good death, and we don't have to make a storm at a parting of a relationship that persists. So
yeah. And that's part of the of the spiritual history of John Donne himself, that as a cleric, he would be trying to console people about, if you live a good life, you can have an easy death. So that's that's definitely behind that, and it's a very startling image. I think there's a lot that's pretty startling and daring about this poem, and one of them is that it starts as if, and even in the title, it starts as if it's a poem about dying, and then it turns out to be a love poem pretty quickly. So let's get to that third stanza that Jim Haber was talking about before. Moving of the earth brings harms and fears. Men reckon what it did and meant, but trepidation of the spheres, though greater far, is innocent. So trepidation of the spheres is really something that you have to look up in a footnote. It's not an ordinary term. It's very much a kind of scientific term, and I think it was already pretty obsolete in Donne's own time. So he's doing something, a little teasing, and then the word trepidation clearly has a kind of double meaning, and he's saying, let's not have any trepidation about this, but there is this obsolete scientific term for which we are grateful for the footnote. One of the few places where we really need a footnote.
Will you reveal the footnote?
Is it? Oh, yeah, it's not in your. So in my book it says, the trepidation or liberation of the ninth, the crystalline sphere, invented to account for the precession of the equinoxes, communicate. I'm sorry, this is harder to understand than the poem, but most of the footnotes are like that. It's some kind of cosmic motion that is not dangerous and not harmful. That it has to do with the way the nine spheres beyond the level of the earth are moving around, and that they, as I understand it, that they're not moving in perfect circles.
They go forward.
There's a retrograde motion.
Yes,
an illusion of a retrograde motion. So
exactly. See, that makes more sense to me than this footnote does. Mm-hmm. But I can't quite explain. I certainly can't explain it as well as you just did. But there's some kind of cosmic motion that is bigger than an earthquake. And I think moving of the earth is really very literally an earthquake. And that earthquakes were signs of bad omens, that people took, that people, found, dire meaning, or were looking for dire explanations of what an earthquake meant. Not that it was just a natural phenomenon, but that it actually was a symbol of something, of something ominous. That it was literally an ominous, literally full of a bad omen. And he's talking about, and we have to, remember, we have to go back to, he's talking about a separation, that he's going to be traveling, he's going to be moving, and he's going to be moving away from the person he loves, who will be waiting at home. And he's saying, there are different kinds of movement, and people worry about an earthquake, but there's some much larger motion in the universe that isn't anything to worry about.
No,
that's just natural.
Right. I take back my reading then. Trepidation of the spheres would account for a planet suddenly turning around and going in the wrong direction.
Right.
And that would be worrisome, except that it's not.
Except that it's not.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, Stephen.
Oh, I was just going to say that to me, this is pointing to not a heliocentric universe, but a God-centric universe. Mm-hmm. They're trying to say, see, the universe is perfect, and then we see a flaw. No. Those little flaws are okay. Don't let that shake all our beliefs. Right. Only on Earth, when our shaking goes on, that's something to be worried about. But don't worry, as if the universe is still perfect. But what I thought was so sort of a delightful little game he played here was, it's the first time that he breaks the rhythm, where he suddenly falls out of the iams temporarily and returns it when the universe is there. So moving the Earth falls out of iams into trochees, and then trepidation of spheres goes back into it. So the Earth is the dangerous place, but the universe is perfect again, the way I set it up originally.
Yeah. So there's a what we call in the poetry academic world a metrical substitution of a trochee moving of the earth. The is the e is apostrophized in some earlier printings. So moving moving of the earth. So a trochee, dada, dada, moving the earth, moving of the earth brings harm, and then it goes back to a sort of regular metrical pattern. Da 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 da. Can you follow that? Okay. This is Poetry 101. But you're right. You're absolutely right to point that out, that in the line that demonstrates some kind of irregular movement, the verse itself becomes irregular. Stephen, I think that is the point, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And since it's regular again, when he mentions spheres, by that time, it's as if there was an earth tremor and the tremor subsided.
Right.
He's pointing always that there's going to be a perfect form, maybe to his wife. You can trust this,
Right.
See, it'll return to the proper state. And I think that's why I said God-centric, as if he's trying to say that faith is going to be more important than, the human trust that we talk about.
Right. Well, the geocentric theory, the whole idea that the Earth was the center of the universe, implied that somewhere out there in the ninth sphere, and the numerology is all very, written into this code. 3 times the Trinity, and 3 times 3, and the ninth sphere. And that somewhere just beyond the ninth sphere was the hand of God that was turning everything in the universe, that was making the universe work. So geocentric and God-centric are really, they're the same thing, or they're equivalents. And that the whole idea that everyone had to rethink the fact that the Earth was not the center of the universe was really was a profound disturbance in world culture, and I think this poem, in that respect, looks backward rather than forward, and still sees the earth as the center, and God, the hand of God, being out there making it all, oiling the wheels. So, and then the next line, dull sublunary lovers. So this is the sphere that we are in below the moon, sublunar. And the moon is the symbol of what?
Love.
Yes, but scientifically.
Dead planet.
Change.
Yeah, that what happens beneath the sphere of the moon, which is here on Earth, is that things change all the time, that we have tides, we have, the moon looks different every night. Everything, something beyond the moon is something sort of eternal and changeless, except for this odd little trepidation that that occurs somewhere way out in space. But that's easily explained and not to worry about.
I
But
had such a different interpretation, Lloyd.
oh, tell me.
I was just thinking this meant moony lovers, like lovers who and whose soul is sense. In other words, there are only physical lovers,
right,
who love when the moon is full, and that makes them randy, but not necessarily when the lover is not present.
No, I agree with half of what you're saying, because it's not that it's not a kind of romantic idea. I think it's the idea that it's very rare that a love is permanent, that a love is that a love you know, that I'll love you forever, that can be literally true, and that usually love is very changeable. I mean, think of a play like A Midsummer Night's Dream, where people are falling in love with the wrong people every 5 minutes. And that here the whole idea of beneath the sphere of the moon, everything is very changeable, but their love, Donne and his wife, and these two lovers are not changeable, that they are not like the ordinary lovers beneath the sphere of the moon who can change on a whim, at a moment's notice.
Lloyd, I thought that sublunary also was working with the word in the next line, sense, which I think of as meaning sensual. And so I read sublunary in a more simple way as simply meaning earthly, as opposed to otherworldly. And perhaps the business about changing would fit in, but it seemed like more of the contrast between Earth and the outer spheres.
Yeah, I don't see a conflict between those two things, and that it does mean, I mean, in some way, earthly means ordinary in some way.
And it means non-spiritual, I think.
Non-spiritual, yeah. But that also, that implies changeable, that you fall in and out of love, that
based on the senses,
purely on the senses, yes.
Right.
And then there's this I think there's just a terrific pun in whose soul is sense cannot admit absence.
Yeah, right. Good. I didn't notice that.
Yeah. So if love depends on the senses, then if there is a parting, then does that mean, you know, we use the phrase long distance relationship, and we
right.
and we know how challenging that can be. And Donne is saying, and then even the word elemented, cannot admit absence, because it doth remove those things which elemented it. And even elemented, the elements are a kind of scientific term that those are the elements of the love, the completely physical aspect of love are the elements that make the love. And if you separate the lovers, then you risk the love becomes more tenuous.
Exactly. Yes.
And he's saying, but we are beyond that. That's the laity. Those are the ordinary people. But we are above that. We have a spiritual love that doesn't depend on physical proximity. But we, by a love so much refined that ourselves know not what it is. So this is beyond science.
Right.
This is beyond intellectual or scientific understanding. Interassured of the mind. And then we have this very kind of archaic syntax, which is I think is a challenge to a modern reader, that we have to put the words in back in an order that makes sense to us. Care less eyes, lips, and hands to miss. So we feel less care about missing eyes, lips, and hands. We're not so, we like them. We like eyes, lips, and hands, but our love doesn't depend on them. That we can separate, and that our love is still just, is still true, is still real, even without eyes, lips, and hands. And then we have then there's this very interesting thing, which I think, I say, 100 years later, writers had a really difficult time accepting this kind of language in a love poem. Our two souls, therefore, and Denise, you may particularly recall the word therefore in Andrew Marvell's To His Coy Mistress, and the way that whole poem is a kind of logical syllogism. And Donne does something very similar here. He's being very logical. He is making a logical argument to his wife that she shouldn't be upset that he has to take this trip. And that if we think logically about who we are and what kind of love we have, then we really don't have to worry about this. Our two souls, therefore, which are one. It's a really big assertion. They are a common soul. Their love is so great that they are a common soul. Though I must go, endure not yet a breach. So he's going to leave, but their love isn't going to be separated. And then I think one of the great images in English poetry. Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Delia. But an expansion, or probably pronounced expansion, to rhyme with one. An expansion like gold to airy thinness beat. I am at a loss for words. That image is so beautiful of the beaten gold that can stretch forever, because gold is important in this cosmology. Yes, Denise, right. That's exactly right. The Platonic idea of two souls in one body, and that the gold. If we look at there's a wonderful book. It's a little book, and if you're interested, it's really worth reading. It's called the Elizabethan World. I think it's the Elizabethan Worldview or the Elizabethan World Picture by a writer named E.M.W. Tilliard. And it's a little book, maybe 90 pages, something like that. And what he does is that he looks at the sort of worldview, the pre-Copernican worldview, in which there are these 9 spheres, but that everything in the world exists in a kind of hierarchy, the way the spheres of the universe exist in a hierarchy. So that everything on Earth is in some kind of hierarchical, even spiritual order. So that the perfect metal, I mean, lead may be the worst at the bottom of the list, but gold is at the top of that list. And that gold was actually thought to be a kind of combination of all of the other elements. So and the rose may be the perfect flower, the highest order of plant life. And partly gold rings and roses are geometrically based on circles, and circles are the perfect geometrical form because there's no beginning and no end. So that geometry and astronomy and mineralogy and botany, everything in the world and beyond the world is in a kind of order, and that this order was really threatened by Copernicus and by this new worldview. And it was very hard to let go of that sense of an order that was not just about astronomy, but that existed in everyday life, and that was kind of taken for granted in everyday life. So the gold to airy thinness beat is just something that that blossoms out of a kind of everyday assumption about how the universe is organized. I don't know. Does this make sense to you? Can you? So, in a way, what those 18th century writers who condemned the metaphysicals and called them metaphysical, Donne and Herbert and Marvell and Crashaw and all these wonderful poets of a century earlier, they are not being radically different or challenging an order that they're used to. They're just using images that are part of that order that they could take for granted. And you know, this is also leading up to the last big image in this poem, the compasses and the circle that the compasses make as really a sign of the perfection of their love, that you could even use that you can even use a mathematical image in a love poem, and that it will have a lot of sense. It will have real meaning and real emotional meaning. So here we start with the logical argument. If the our two souls, therefore, which are one. But there's the therefore of the logical argument. And then he thinks, well, but you could argue that they may not be one. If they be two, well, we're two. And I mean, maybe you could say we are two, not one. If they be two, but if they're two, they are two so as stiff twin compasses are two. And then we get this logical alternative to what makes a perfect love, that they may not be two souls in the same body. They may be two separate souls, but they're separate in a way that, you know, that a mathematical compass has two elements that are joined together, and that are used to make a circle, which is another symbol of perfection. No beginning and no end. If they be two, they are two so as stiff twin compasses are two. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show. And there's the idea of a show, of a demonstration, of a side tempest. Right. Right. I'm looking at Denise's note. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show to move, but doth if the other do. And
can I ask a question? I get confused in this stanza, because at one point I think he's talking about two compasses, twin, and that, but yet it seems to be talking about a single compass, and I am mixed up. How many compasses are there?
I think there's just one. And don't we use the expression a pair of compasses?
Yeah. Yes.
It's one compass with two legs.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that was the terminology.
I think so. Jim, does that?
It's like a pair of pants.
Yeah. Right.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, well, that clears it up.
Yeah, I think it's just one compass.
It seemed as if it had to be one compass. There was no way I could make it into two, but I was fooled by the word twin.
Well, he's teasing you.
Well, he got me.
He's teasing us. Makes no show to move, but doth if the other do. I have to say, I find this image Oh yeah, not the directional kind. Yeah, it's a compass for drawing, not for north and south.
And
So that
specifically for drawing a circle, a perfect circle.
and for drawing a perfect circle, exactly. And that's really what's behind this. It's this kind of ancient image of perfection, of a circle being an image of perfection. Um, uh, and for me, there's something just really moving about the leg of the compass that's staying in the middle, but that leans and hearkens after it. It's so emotional. It just seems, well, she doesn't move, but her spirit, her love, her affection is leaning after the person she has to who is leaving her. And though it in the center sit, yet when the other far doth roam, it leans and hearkens after it, and grows erect as it comes home. And if you want to make something sexual out of that, I entirely welcome that. That interpretation. And I don't know. I'm just, as I say, I'm just so moved by this image, which for a couple of hundred years, or almost a couple of hundred years, was used as an object of ridicule. That, how can you write a love poem about about math and science and astronomy, and that it was really at the beginning of the 20th century, and T.S. Eliot writing this important essay on the metaphysical poets, that really made them or made literary people begin to take these writers seriously, and see what profound, what great writers those 17th century poets were. Such wilt thou be to me, who must, like the other foot, obliquely run. And I think obliquely is very poignant, because his job is not an image of is not an I saw that is not an image of stability, of we don't know what he's doing. He's doing some kind of political mechanism, and it's a tribute. It's a tribute to the stability, the centeredness of the woman he loves, the person he loves, that assures the stability of their love, that assures that he will Denise writes about Marvel's definition of love being a really great love poem, and our love so truly parallel, though infinite can never meet. And I think that's a wonderful poem also. Thy firmness makes my circle just. So his circle is his traveling. And in order to keep the circle from being in order to keep the circle being a perfect circle, her stability is essential to keep his circle just, his circle being a perfect circle. And then he ends where I begun, and I think that's also. I mean, it's a kind of birth image, and that too has a sexual element to it. That he comes back to where he started. I mean, from where he was born.
My end is my big kidnapping.
Exactly. Yeah. Jonathan?
What's striking to me, apart from the imagery in the poem, is just the grammatical structure. When I realized that he has at least 3 very crisply defined similes making up this poem, but there's no metaphor. He never, at least there's nothing I can identify as a metaphor. He never kind of jumps into the mud. It's always sort of like a preacher making an exposition.
In the sense of everything is a simile rather than a metaphor?
Yes.
Yeah. As virtuous men, like gold to airy thinness beat,
as stiff twin
compasses. Yeah.
So he always kind of keeps a distance in that way.
Oh, that's so interesting. I have to say that I mean, he starts the poem with the word that you use for a simile. It's the first word in the poem, and I always think of those images as metaphors, but you're exactly right. They are all similes. Yeah,
it adds a kind of a coolness to the poem that I think maybe what Johnson was complaining about. I don't know, but
it is the scientific mind, and in a way, isn't that? I think that's one of the things that's so moving about this, that he is like Marvel. He gives the illusion of being completely logical about something that is actually completely emotional and spiritual. And that's very moving to me. At least I have found it so.
Lloyd, I saw something that added to the emotional spiritual that you're talking about. I never saw it before this morning. In stanza 4, which starts dull sublunary lover's love, stanza 6, there are 2 relatively strong enjambments, which I had never noticed.
Oh.
And the first one is soul ascends cannot admit new line absence. And then the second one is though I must go endure not yet new line a breach. I just thought that was the coolest thing when I saw it.
Very cool. Oh. Yeah, that's very cool to have that, to have the line break be obliterated by the enjambment. That is, the 2 separate lines are actually connected, are grammatically connected, and you can't stop at the end of.
And it creates the absence and it creates the breach sonically.
And then denies it at the same time.
Yes. So
Yeah, oh, that's great. That's great.
That was really exciting.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. Any other thoughts? Marita, I guess we should close up shop fairly soon, but any other thoughts or comments?
There's nothing wrong, by the way, in looking at these images sexually. A teacher once told me, a dirty mind is a joy forever.
I totally agree. Totally agree. A friend of mine sent me a poem which I am not going to read to you, and which I actually don't understand at all, and I'm not sure I even like it very much, but I wasn't aware of it. And there's a poem by John Ashbery called "A Mourning Forbidding Valediction." And it's a 2-page poem, and if you should ever find it and have a reading of it and understand it, let me know, because I am. It's fascinating. It's a fascinating poem, but I'm not sure I understand it. It does have an allusion to Keats in it, which I always value. But anyway, a mourning, M-O-U-R, A Mourning Forbidding Valediction by John Ashbery. But good luck. I thank you so much. Thank you for participating, and I hope you learned as much as I did. I love these conversations, and I think, oh well, I'm supposed to be the expert, and I know these poems inside and out, and I always learn something from what you have to say. So I'm so grateful, and it's really nice to see you, and I hope we get to actually see each other in real life rather than in Zoom life very soon. So I hope you're all in the process of being vaccinated and safe, and we'll see you on Zoom next month. We don't have a date yet, and I don't have a poem yet, but I will, and I wouldn't miss it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Marita, again, thank you so much for making this possible. We couldn't do it without you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Lloyd. And thanks everybody for being here. This was lovely.
Thank you.
Take care and be well.
Thanks.
Be well,
it was a real blast.
Very well.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thanks so much.